What changed for me was the passing of my father suddenly and unexpectedly. And when that happened, I kept coming down to the basement and picking things up and seeing what I could make. And I started to hear melodies and hear words that I hadn't before in quite that way. It seemed like it wanted to have my voice and my words on it.
Welcome back to Second Verse, the podcast about artists who didn't quit. They just found a different way back. I'm your host, Becky Boyland, and today's conversation is one I think will resonate deeply if you've ever spent years creating quietly, supporting other artists, holding music alongside a career, or wondering if your voice was ever meant to step fully into the spotlight. My guest today is Joshua David Thayer. Josh is a longtime bassist with deep roots in the Northampton, Massachusetts music scene, playing in bands like Love Minus Zero, Fancy Trash, and Hadley Transfer Station. For more than 3 decades, music was part of his life, but mostly from the sideman role. Then, after a series of profound losses and life upheavals, something shifted. At age 50, Josh felt an urgent pull, not just to make music, but to finally release music of his own, with his own voice at the center. Since November of 2024, he's released 2 self-produced solo albums, including his newest record, So Little Close to Nothing, which just dropped on December 5th. In this episode, we talk about grief as a creative catalyst, the courage it takes to sing when you never thought you would, why finishing matters more than perfection, and how trusting the process can lead you to work that feels honest, complete, and deeply human. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late or questioned whether your creative voice really matters, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Welcome, Josh. Thank you so much for being on Second Verse.
Hi, Becky. Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
I love to dive in with everybody's origin story. And you had some really interesting inspiration as a kid that got you into music.
Yeah. I remember early on in elementary school, my mother starting to take guitar lessons, and I tagged along a few times and was just sort of entranced by the guitar and making music with your hands and a piece of wood out of thin air, really. And so I got kind of interested in like, what could that be and what could that look like for me? And I was interested in guitar, but my parents signed me up for piano, and I wound up playing piano for a few years, taking lessons and not getting great at it, honestly. But when I got into high school, the piano lessons led me into the school bands a bit, playing xylophone and glockenspiel. And soon after that, switched over to trombone as my main instrument. And so I was playing trombone in all the school bands and everything. And while this was happening, we started a school pep band, which was to play at all the basketball games and everything. And I think those experiences, learning songs to play at ball games, kind of got us interested, a few friends from that group and myself, in starting our own thing. Luckily, some inspiration came also in the form of one of the other guys in the band who bought an electric bass guitar, and I had not seen one of those before, didn't understand what they were, but was getting into bands like U2 and The Cure and things like that, and started putting the pieces together and said, oh, that's what that thing is, and that's how they're using it, and really got inspired by the instrument and by him picking it up and what he could do with it. I went out and got my own, and that sort of led into playing original music and starting bands, and the rest is kind of history.
I never really thought about how powerful pep band can be for that, because that really was, when I was growing up, I played trumpet, and that was the first time that you had drum kit. Mm-hmm. You know, you didn't just have all the percussion and all of that. And so I bet that for a lot of the kids that I went to school with, that was probably part of the inspiration for them to do some similar things, and bass guitars and guitars started showing up in the band room. And I know for me, when I started picking up guitar, that I had kind of that same feeling, like, I don't need anything else. This is the thing. This is what I've been waiting for.
Yeah, totally. Playing trombone in the school bands, it was classical it was jazz, and it was, movie soundtrack things like Raiders of the Lost Ark and whatnot. But the pep band was sort of like pop music and a different sensibility and sort of getting a sense of what that kind of stuff could be like. And then that led down all these other roads to explore, right? Like different bands, different artists and different things, and making those connections. But yeah, you're totally right that I think it sort of opens up a new world for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And then you started to find some success in high school by diving in and learning the bass.
Yeah, I bought the bass after saving up for a little bit, went out and found one. And I actually got a deal on it because the guy at the store, when I was there, quoted me the wrong price. And I went home and talked to my folks and then went back to get it. And he sort of sheepishly was like, yeah, I told you a little bit less than it was supposed to be, but because I said that and you got the paperwork, I'll still sell it to you for that. So that was great for me. And then that same day, I came home with the bass and my friends called and were like, do you have the bass? Like, come over, let's make music. So literally the very first day I got the bass, we started making songs together. And that band sort of quickly, we had one lineup change of a guitar player, but it quickly started to get some attention, and we started booking some shows and getting asked to go play like open mic nights at the bars when we're 15, 16, 17 years old. So we had to have a chaperone, 2 chaperones most times, because a couple of the dads were hip dads that wanted to go out to the bars anyway. So yeah, we started playing around the sort of Northampton, Massachusetts music scene pretty quickly. And yeah, it led to a few cool things.
That's amazing. You had shared with me a couple of the different opportunities you had. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, sure. We got to do a few pretty cool things for high schoolers making original songs in the basement of their parents' house. One is Juliana Hatfield, who's a sort of renowned indie alternative artist, had a lot of success in the 90s and is still cooking, here in the Boston area. She had a band called the Blake Babies, and they played a really historic music venue in Northampton, Mass, called the Iron Horse. And we got a chance to open up for the Blake Babies, which was great. We felt like these were rock stars coming through town, and we got to share the stage and share the dressing room. In hindsight, they were probably annoyed that we were in the dressing room with them, but we thought it was cool and we were playing too, so we figured, why not? And so that was a really cool experience. And I guess one more anecdote on that piece is that the night before, while they were on tour, Juliana had blown up her bass amp. And so she got to the venue and didn't have an amp that was working, so she used my amplifier for her set.
Wow.
And then a couple of years later, I sold that amp and put that on the flyers when I was selling it. And I think that fact helped it sell.
Oh, I bet.
And then the sort of high profile show to mention was, there's a band that people are probably familiar with called Four Non Blondes that had a big hit called What's Going On. They came through town, and because we had a good relationship with the folks booking these venues at this point, we got to open up for Four Non Blondes at a venue called Pearl Street, which is also another sort of historic but now sadly defunct venue in Northampton. And that was wild because it was the first time we sort of went outside after we played and people were outside, and it was the first time that folks were coming up to us asking for autographs, assuming we were on the road with the band and everything. So that was really kind of an interesting, again, like we're 15, 16, 17 years old and opening up for this national act at sort of the height of their success. So that was wild.
That's just so amazing. So this was something, though, that you felt early on was still just going to be maybe a dream to chase, but not necessarily something to achieve.
Yeah. When you're a high school kid making songs in the basement and you're watching things like U2's Rattle and Hum documentary and things like that, you of course think, oh, that would be awesome to be on these big stages. And sometimes you have this idea like, oh, we just need to send out demo tapes, and like when we play a show, we play it really great, and an A&R person's going to happen in and see us, right? And so there's those little bits of dreams and things, but I don't think we ever thought, oh, we're going to be musicians in a band forever, and this is going to be our future. Even at a young age, you sort of know, like, this is an experience for now, and grow up and you move on, and you need to go do other things.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, or it was an important way to look at it at that age. Stay in the moment, really, and recognize that this is a very, very cool experience. But those were still the days where somebody could happen upon you and maybe get you into the industry, but it wouldn't be that many years before that whole thing would change.
Right. Yeah. To put a timeline on things, this was 1990, 1991. It was sort of pre-Nirvana, like Nirvana hadn't broke. And when they came along, they, of course, changed everything in the music world. And so it's funny, like in high school, you do it. Then we were college age when the grunge scene happened, and it did seem like people were out, rolling across the United States looking for bands to sign as fast as they could to get them out and processed into the world. So I think while we're in college, there's probably a little bit of a feeling of like, okay, if we can keep this going and get in front of the right people, it'll happen. And then you sort of see as time goes by and you need to get jobs and you need to do other things, and the wherewithal diminishes a bit over time, right?
Yeah, very true. So you go into your career phase, and I thought it was interesting that you were in design and marketing because there's definitely a through line with a lot of artists. I'm one of them that has spent a lot of time in marketing and design, but you seem to stay kind of nearby so that you could be in the scene while you were still working.
Yeah. After college, the high school band had a couple other permutations through college years and then faded, mostly because people went off to school in different places. And it was just, obviously, you can't have band rehearsals with someone who's several states away. And so after college, got into design work. I was an art major, so design and screen printing, silkscreen, was sort of an extension of that. I was still following my degree and also being creative, which I think is part of what keeps me in music as well. I was definitely maintaining a pretty strict daytime job. A lot of that shift was 7 to 3. And I did keep the roles sort of light, I think, for that reason, so that I could have some of that freedom and flexibility, and got into a band like 2002 where we would do crazy things like get out of work at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, get in a van and drive to New York City to play a show, and then drive home and get home at 3 a.m. and work the next morning. Right. So there's a point where you can still do those things, and it feels, I suppose you feel some bit of hope and excitement and interest that you're going to reach an audience and build a crowd. And again, like, as you point out, like it was a little bit past the crest of A&R people out into the world looking for bands to sign. But you still try to make things happen in some way as best you can, right? And I think it's a little bit of like accepting or feeling that keeping music going or keeping some creative act of some sort going is part of your essence or lifeblood or something.
Yeah.
Somewhat esoteric,
But absolutely true, because having that thing that you love and having it on the side as a hobby or, an aspiration of something bigger than that is sometimes just the thing that does keep you going through the day and get you moving on to the next thing. Because even when we have primary careers that we enjoy, there's still, if there's that longing, that means there is something else that is part of who we are that just needs to be out there. And a lot of times that's because somebody else needs to hear it too.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think like I've been drawing since I was a kid. I went to art school. I was playing music all throughout as well. So there's a big part of my identity that's wrapped up in these sort of creative endeavors. And I think, obviously, you look at my career and it's been also trying to find ways to bleed that into the day as much as possible, right? And working in design and working in creative, and then finding ways to do things like, oh, we're making a video and we need some music. Let me see if I can make a little piece of music to put underneath. It's just ways of trying to turn the thing you love into something that's going to also be part of your career and your income.
Yeah, it's true. We kind of have more success by mashing it up. And I think that that's really a very creative endeavor in and of itself and adds just so much more. And sometimes we don't realize we're doing it until we suddenly have almost a portfolio that is this wide of all the things that we can do with all the things that we like to do. And my biggest challenge is when I want to try to do all of the things, which I can't do. So it's almost harder to bring it back down and scale to something that actually is manageable, but still having all those toes dipped into different things. One day it starts to make sense. Yeah.
There's always that like jack of all trades, master of none, right? And there's more to that phrase, but the point I think is like, there's not necessarily harm in pursuing a lot of things at once, because the things that you do inform the way you think, and then that changes your approach to all the different elements of things that you're trying. And hopefully there is a way for those things to sort of shift, like the plates shift in a line and then gives you some sort of solid footing in one area versus another.
Yeah, I think being a generalist for a long time really can be very helpful in being a better specialist. Mm-hmm. And when we specialize so early sometimes, or think that let's just bypass all the other stuff and just go focus on this one thing, then if something changes, whether it's the industry changes or you discover that, hey, I don't like this thing, then you're stuck. And where do you turn if you don't really have anything else? And that's a really insightful way to look at that it's okay. It's okay to try a whole bunch of stuff. And I love in particular the fact that you said that it really changes your perspective. It makes it easier for you to be really creative when you're thinking from a different angle or coming at it from some completely different field.
Right. Well, because when you get down to it, like, we're just an accumulation of all the things we've done, right? And how you approach this moment and the moment a minute from now and the moment an hour from now is totally based on how you approached every single thing in your past. So logically, the more things you approach and the more things you try and the more things you experiment with, you have much stronger lenses to figure out how to react to the things that you encounter going forward.
It's also funny, too, as songwriters, because we want to write from so many different perspectives. But if we focus all of our time and energy just on writing, then a lot of times we don't have experiences to actually write about. And that can be challenging. Not that we can have all the experiences, but there is also just experience in being well-read or just participating in different activities or seeing different parts of the world. So all of those things make it easier to then enhance the imagination and actually write from different perspectives.
Completely. Yeah, 100%.
We'll be back with more after this break. Second Verse is sponsored by Attitude Creativity. Many indie music artists don't have a website that grows their audience and reflects who they are, so they get lost in the noise of streaming. Marketing and brand messaging with Attitude Creativity helps boost your brand and build a site that hits all the right notes. You want to be an artist who stands out from the crowd, and to do that, you need your music to be heard. If your website doesn't reflect who you are or make an impact, you feel like a singer who's been handed a pair of drumsticks instead of a mic. You deserve a website and brand messaging you can be proud of, and that doesn't take time away from your music. As an artist like you, I understand how overwhelming websites and marketing can be. And that's why, putting on my other creative hat, I put my decades of marketing and development experience to work for you. You'll no longer have to apologize for your website. You'll look and feel like a professional with a custom story branded website you can be proud of. And right now, you can get a head start with my free downloadable EPK blueprint and start building your electronic press kit to promote your music. Head to attitudecreativity.com/blueprint to get your copy. That's Attitude, ATTITUDE, creativity.com/blueprint. Second Verse is brought to you by Singing Straw. Oh, you caught me in the middle of a vocal warm-up. This is one of my favorite ways to wake up my vocal cords before a singing session or even a nice long conversation for the Second Verse podcast. It's the singing straw, a simple but powerful tool for straw phonation, a vocal technique that promotes healthy vocal cord closure and a gentle but mighty way to increase range and identify areas to work on. For me, it was key to regaining my voice after vocal cord paralysis. But you don't have to wait until a vocal injury to use it. In fact, I recommend that you don't. Make the singing straw part of your daily routine, and you'll be amazed what your voice can do. Check it out at secondversepod.com/singing straw. You have sort of this big catalyst then that changed from having music on the side to music on the side plus, because we'll talk about that later, how you view your music right now. But there was something that changed everything. So talk about that transition.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I had been away from music for a long time, working more on day job and raising a family and those sorts of things. And a few things happened that sort of led to a shift that sort of gets me to where I am today. The biggest, kind of most impactful, is that I lost my father back in 2023. I'd been dabbling for a while in coming down to the basement and picking up an instrument and trying to just record some things, mostly to practice, to kind of build a catalog of ideas and things to have available. But I didn't really think of those as things that I would be owning wholeheartedly and singly. I didn't think of them as things that I would be adding my voice to, because I had never thought about being sort of a front person, a singer, kind of sharing my sort of deep personal thoughts out to the world in any way. Some of that I think is just being a bass player for so long. But what changed for me was the passing of my father suddenly and unexpectedly. And when that happened, I kept coming down to the basement and picking things up and seeing what I could make. And I started to hear melodies and hear words that I hadn't before in quite that way. And so I had this batch of material that sort of surfaced from the pool of stuff that seemed like it wanted to be together. And it seemed like it wanted to have my voice and my words on it. And so I really just sort of started to tug on that a little bit. It was kind of terrifying at first, accepting like, okay, I'm going to try to sing on this thing. I had no background in that, had no experience with that. And I just turned on a microphone and said, no matter what, I'm going to get to the end. And I tried one and it wasn't terrible. It wasn't super embarrassing. So I tried another and kind of just kept going. And that led to pulling together a solo record of 12 songs for the first time.
That's just so incredible and such a powerful way to channel what was all coming up for you in your life. And I just think that's so amazing that was really a new chapter of something that had been a companion. You know, your music had been a companion your entire life, and this was just a new expression, a new chapter. I love that you kind of wrestled with that personal feeling of, I don't know if this is going to be any good, but I'm just going to do it. And I think there are a lot of people, a lot of artists or aspiring artists who think they're pretty good, but aren't willing to get through it and get to the end and want to overthink it and then just don't have, something finished. So that's just such a really kind of beautiful picture of the process that you went through. And I know that you have a kind of a unique creative process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's unique. I'm spending all my time basically down here by myself. And I sort of work through a real sense of discovery. I don't really have any preconceived ideas when I sit down. And I'm not doing things like sitting in a cafe with a notebook trying to catch my lyrics. For me, the act of creation is about creating and reacting almost entirely. And the recording and writing processes are fully intertwined. At least they are right now. I'm not saying that will always be that way, but what I end up doing for the most part is in the evenings after the kids go to bed, come down, pick up an instrument, noodle around a little bit and find something that's interesting, and then arm a track and start recording and seeing what happens. And from there, I really just build and respond and react and listen and listen and listen and see what emerges out of that. I make a lot of playlists and load them up on SoundCloud and drive around and listen, or go for a walk with headphones and my iPhone and listen until I hear things, right? I'm really not trying to force myself into the material. I'm trying to let the material present itself and then capture that in sort of the most honest way that I can. And that's true for all the instrumentation, lyrics, melodies, everything is sort of arriving in a lot of ways. And I think of myself as sort of channeling that more than anything.
And it kind of sounds like the process of really working with a traditional band in a way. You're reacting and responding and playing with whatever kind of comes out in the session. It's just that your session gets a little bit longer, I imagine, because you are the band. But it's such a really retro but also original kind of way to do it, and almost analog, but analog in a different way, because it's I'm assuming traditionally, rock band type of instrumentation, which I really, really dig. And I think that's a very authentic way to do that, and builds on all of those years of experience that you have, even though you're doing something that's completely fresh and original now in this process. Yeah. My history is all in rock, obviously, as we've talked about. And so I really think about when I'm putting stuff together, I hear things in that frame of mind, right? Is there bass here? Is there guitar here? Is there some keyboard thing? How are they going to fit together, and who does what when? And a lot of that is what's driving the sort of arrangements and flow of the songs from start to finish. I try really hard to not force things, as I mentioned. And there was the Rick Rubin book, The Creative Act, which came out a couple of years ago. And that was a huge influence for me because it was published about the same time that I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do here? Like, how do I my relationship with music? Or even more broadly, like, what are these things that have occurred in my life? What effect do those things have on the way I interact with the world, with myself, with how I show up, with the things I want to represent and put out there? And that kind of all swirled into this process, I think, of wanting it to be capturing, forcing, and trying to keep it as authentic as possible. And some of that even is in, setting some guidelines or some guidance for myself around how I even capture, like how I even record parts, right? In 2025, with the digital tools that are available, you can layer and edit and cut and paste and comp and do all these things to end up with the absolute perfect from start to finish, with editing syllables of phrases. But I kind of treat it, as you mentioned, in more of an analog way, where I kind of arm a track and record, and if it's not good, I delete it and I arm a track and record again, right? I don't have this pile of takes to sort through. I have the take that's the most recent one, and that's, I either use it or I don't. I move on to a different take. And I think that's part of, for me, what keeps things feeling sort of fresh and exciting in a way that's close to playing with a band, as you're keying in on, as I can, and is just me playing with myself, right? Like, trying to create a band-like environment that I can live in when I'm layering my own playing on top of my own playing. It's such a wonderful way to do it that way too. Not that, having the tools and being able to do all the deep edits, there are times when I need this thing to sound like this thing, and I'm going to have to do all kinds of surgery on it. But I have found that because I regularly perform not so much my own music, I'm recording in the box and doing all of that, but when I go to lay down a vocal, I need to treat it more and more like it's a live performance and be less fussy and precious about it. And the outcome then is better because I also am more in the moment. I'm in the song. I'm not in this verse or this phrase. I'm actually experiencing all the things I'm trying to cover in the song and explain and convey. And it's better. It's a better performance because it's a more authentic performance and not so isolated to this one little section. So I love the way that your process is coming out in this way.
Yeah, thank you. For me right now, it seems to be working out. But I think the caveats are, number one, I don't think you can ever get locked into thinking this is my process and how I do things, right? Because you sort of shoot yourself in the foot if you're inflexible in that way.
Yeah.
Right? So as a creative in any medium, I think you always need to be able to try new things, try things in a different way, be able to sort of pivot and react if the process isn't working, to try something different, try a different way in or a different way to listen, or whatever it is, a different way to approach the thing that you're trying to chase. And then the other thing I'll say is that my process, and talking about my process, is not in any way diminishing anyone else's process. And a bunch of my career, I've worked in tech, and I worked for an audio software company. So all of that is based around really heavy digital manipulation and computer-based editing and fixing and all sorts of things. So I'm not opposed to any of that stuff either, right? And certainly, as you mentioned, there's time and place for those sorts of things. A guitar track that's too noisy, there are tools to go in and digitally find the noise and remove it and keep those things the way that you want them to be. Or if for a certain song you need to cut together 10 different vocal takes to get the sound you want, is totally valid. Right?
Absolutely. The mashup of those kinds of things is when you really want to get an authentic performance, but you're going to have to fix a couple of things, then just do all of them top to tail and put yourself in the moment, put yourself through the song. And it's true, a lot of people have a lot of different processes, but what I've enjoyed so much is getting to see what other processes people have, because sometimes I find something that is a solution to what I've been missing, or it's an enhancement. It enables me to actually do something a little bit better, and better in the creative sense as opposed to, an objective sense necessarily. And sometimes it's just something in the toolbox for a particular project, or, 2 or 3 songs, or just an idea, or a co-write experience, something like that. And I've probably learned more just from seeing how other people get started than by reading a ton of tutorials or watching a bunch of videos and people saying, well, this is the way that you have to do this. And I'm like, I don't work that way. And some of those things I've dismissed are the things that when I saw them in practice with a person where it actually was working well for them, and then I decided to try it, then I found how it could work for me. But it didn't work for me the way it had been explained to me. But I do think that one of the things that when we get so bound up in the box and in the minutia, we forget that the music started originally as a performance. All the music started as a performance that went from the beginning to the end. And sometimes just zooming out and taking it as a full composition before we come in and do all the fixes and the nitty gritty. Brings all the life back to it, and the energy and the joy. And then you find where you might need to use more tools, but you get the whole picture of it. And I guess I'm kind of going on about that because I've been really trying to do that more lately. And I've just found it so much more impactful and joyful.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, Becky, that there's a way of working that's almost like adding fidelity as you go, right? It's like, if you think about making a painting, not everybody works this way, of course, but one approach is you do a sketch, and then you do an underpainting, and then you add your first colors, and then you add your shadows, and then you add your glazes, and you keep going and going. And as you go, it gets more and more refined and closer to what you want it to be. And I think you can do the same thing in music, right? There can be a sloppy copy, which is a term my daughter uses in her schoolwork, right? Get your sloppy copy done first. Then you can go back and start to pick and choose and say, oh, actually, okay, cool. I need to redo this bridge section because it didn't quite, like I want to try a different chord for the fourth one or something. And you can swap that section out. Then you can go in and say, let me try a different background vocal, or let me try a different guitar tone, or whatever it is, to get you from your initial idea, which has that urgency, to a finished product that's a listenable performance from start to finish. And obviously listenable is a subjective term, right? Listenable is different from someone else's listenable. But I think that there's a totally valid way of working that leverages a rawness that can then be manipulated into what you think is the appropriately less raw state.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that leads naturally into when you do work alone a lot, that how do you overcome the idea of, is this good enough? Is this ready to go? Am I really supposed to be doing this kind of thing? How do you get into just having that confidence in yourself?
I think there's always going to be a challenge working alone around figuring out whether something is good enough or presentable or shareable. I don't know that I have any definite ways to work around or against that necessarily. But I think for me, it comes back again to instinct and listening. I try really hard to let the material speak to me. So the way to do that for me is, again, put headphones in, put it on the car stereo and drive around and just listen on repeat, to see what you hear the material asking for. And when it stops asking, oftentimes is when it's done. Sometimes that's not true, though, because sometimes your material, for me, the songs may stop talking for a little bit because I'm not ready to the next piece of the conversation. And that harkens back again to having as many experiences as you can change the way that you interact with things. And so you might work on something up to a certain point, and if you're brave enough to set it down when you're not feeling the same urgency about it, go off and have other experiences, travel, read, watch a movie, read a book, eat something in a new restaurant, and then come back and listen again and see if those new things have changed the dialogue with that piece of material. And I think more times than not, you come back and there's something to be added.
I love that picture that the music is asking for something. That is such a beautiful thing, because I think a lot in terms of when it stops bugging me, then it's done. But there are those times when I've had, probably even more recently too, where I have a song that I feel like it's pretty much done, and then, oh no, there's another sound. I can picture this other sound. Mm-hmm. And then when I add it, I'm like, oh, yep, that's what was missing. And so I think that's really, really beautiful. And I've talked a lot on the podcast about collaboration and working with others, which of course is very powerful. And you've done a lot of that. But when we do work alone, there's so much value to all these different modalities. It's, I think, really good and healthy for an artist to also do some work on their own. And even if it's just a song here or there, or a full project or whatever it is, and that culmination of those experiences that you talked about, of being out in the world and doing other things and having interests and knowledge and experience in other things, will help you to have the ear, because it comes back to your ear. And if you have an ear that can recognize when you're on par with what you're chasing, then you don't have to overly question. Obviously, you can find others to kind of confirm your thoughts later down the pathway, but it will help you to actually continue the project and take it to completion and not just question yourself or be paralyzed by that. So much gold there, so many nuggets.
Yeah. And I think it works in the opposite direction as well, right? That like spending time by yourself and learning and experimenting and trying things then changes your relationship with a band experience, as an example, or a co-write with someone later on. Because I know I keep coming back to sort of a similar sort of sentiment, but like who you are after you've tried these things is different from who you were before you tried those things. So what you bring to the table in a new environment is going to be different naturally. And so you bring up a great point that like, even if you just do small projects on your own, it's absolutely going to inform the other things that you're trying to do with your creative output.
Yeah, you have more to bring to the table, and it's not just a list of phrases and, and thoughts and ideas, but actually hearing sounds and recognizing, oh, this could work here, or let me try this kind of thing, and just a sensibility of the experimentation and the wonder of what could we do? What could this be? I like that a lot. I think that's really great. You told me that with technology, you know, in some ways it's easier, obviously, because we can do all of the editing and all of the enhancements and wild things. But in other ways, it's harder to be an independent musician at this stage. And I think that's just so absolutely true. Why don't you talk about that?
As a creative and a musician in 2025, where we find ourselves, there's obviously so much technology at our fingertips and at our disposal that can help us in different ways to sort of create and build and distribute and all these sorts of things. And on the one hand, you really can reach out to so many new outlets and new places and new people through things like social media, obviously, and making music distribution sort of available for everyone through tools like DistroKid or CD Baby to get onto streaming platforms and things like that. But at the same time, there's so much noise that it's really difficult to find an audience that persists, right? And an audience that will pay attention and come back and give spins and be ready for your next thing. I'm not really sure, like most people probably, what the answer is to work around or through that necessarily. I've definitely released stuff and seen a few streams, and I think my entirety of streaming income over the last 7 years is $14 or $17. Like, so we're certainly not making livable wage income from our creative efforts via 25 technology. On the one hand, it's great to have all this material available to discover because there's so much incredible music that people are making, I guess like me, from their basements and their spare bedrooms and rehearsal spaces, and they're able to get it out into the world. The flip side of that is there's so much terrible music, or I'll rephrase that, there's so much music that's maybe not quite right for me also out there in the world. Technology is kind of a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways because I make this stuff and I can record it on my own and I can package it up. But were we better off when we were getting in a van with a pile of CDs and driving around trying to hawk them to people in new cities? I'm not sure.
It is such a blessing that we have all the things at our disposal and we don't have to go through gatekeepers and we can put our stuff out there. But yeah, a lot of other people figured out that they can do that too and may not be putting in the same level of effort. And I think that's really an important recognition to set our own expectations about why is it that we make music and what is it that we love about the music and what are our expectations about the music. Obviously, making music is not a get rich quick scheme. It's a watch the money go to Sweetwater scheme, maybe, or whoever your music company of choice is. And that's not a knock on Sweetwater. I've bought many good things there, but there are definitely ways to make a living. And a lot of that's been shared on this podcast as well. But I think it's also equally important. And I love the way that you look at your music as a hobby you can work hard at because you love it, and that you can consider your primary source of income as something that's supporting this hobby. And the great thing about that is enabling you to put out music that will have an impact on someone. And you may not know what that's going to look like or what that may materialize into later, but that's not the expectation. The expectation is just to make the music and make great music as much as you can.
Yeah, I think my background in art and as a painter sort of got me into that mindset early of I have to create. Like, it's a huge element of my personal identity. And even if I didn't think about it, I would still have a drive to try to figure out ways to create in some form. And if you're doing that to please other people or to impress other people or to try to make money, certainly there is value in that type of output as well. For me, I'm doing it because I'm driven to create things, and I enjoy trying to finish and pack an object of some form, whether that's a painting or whether that's an album, a full album, right? I enjoy that process of crafting something and then figuring out how I turn that into something that heads out into the world in some way. And my marketing background and my design background feeds into that as well. So I get to a point with my material where I spend all this time down here, like creating and picking up guitars and editing things and trying to figure out what's what. And then I sort of flip and I say, okay, cool. Now I got to make some artwork and I got to figure out what I'm going to do on the social media channels. And I got to figure out where I'm going to put for distribution and which ones I'm going to use and which ones I'm not going to use, because there's some that I'm not using. And I think that's what it's about for me, is that sort of end-to-end creative project that also is satisfying to me personally as a creative, as a writer, and as a listener, to craft something that's sort of package and say, here, world, here's a thing that didn't exist before. And that, for me, is enough. And my job is not music, but my job allows me to pursue those things in a way that feels authentic.
That's awesome. And so important, because if we don't have something that we can support alongside while we get to where we're going, and maybe getting to where we're going looks exactly like continuing to have those two things coexist, they still have to feed each other and empower each other. And I think that's super important. So let's actually dive into your current project, your current album, and share a little bit more about that and some of the other projects that you have existing and in the works.
As we speak, I'm about to release my second record, which will come out December 5th. It's a record called So Little Close to Nothing. This is my second solo record. And this has been kind of a journey that started when I began releasing music on my 50th birthday. I had been working on some material, and then while I was waiting for a drum session to have a friend of mine come replace some of the computer drums with live drums, I was coming up on my 50th birthday, and I woke up one morning and got inspired, and a whole song came out sort of suddenly. And it was a week before my 50th. And so I quickly sent that to a friend to mix it and sent it to somebody else to master it, and then release that as my first ever solo material on my 50th birthday. So that was the start of sort of this whole new chapter of presenting myself to the world as a solo music act. And so since then, the material that I was working on around that time became my first record that was released in November of 2024. It's called It Will Still Keep Feeling Rough. That record, a lot of the material really deals directly with a number of changes, but the loss of my father at the time fed into that process and that material and that songwriting. I'm now putting material out on my birthday. So birthday this year, which is the beginning of the year, I released a single with a B-side, which is sort of old-fashioned concept, I suppose, as a digital release, but put out a single that was a track that I had taken off of the record. So I had a leftover, and then I did a new acoustic version of one of the songs from the record, and that became my birthday single this year. And then since then, I've been working on this new record, which I guess to characterize it a little bit, I think where the first record was finding and sort of discovering my voice as a musician, both literally and just creatively and figuratively. This record is probably more about leaning into my sort of personal identity, I guess, as a music maker. And so I think the record has sort of it has a different feel in a lot of ways compared to the first one, but I think touches on a lot of things we've been talking about, I think, which is just feeling sort of more confident and more trusting and more focused and driven to sort of keep creating and packaging and releasing stuff that feels right.
That's phenomenal. And I love that you've kind of created this new routine around your birthday and almost a mile marker, each year and as each creative project comes forward. So I think that's super exciting.
Yeah. Now I have to figure out what I'm going to do on my next birthday, which is coming up in only 8 weeks or so, 7 weeks. Yeah.
Well, we all need deadlines as artists too, right?
I know. So that's a great point. And I think that speaks a little bit also to how do you know when things are done, which we touched on earlier. I think there's another way of making things get done, which is sort of artificial deadlines and goals and timelines. And sometimes you can end up with your most creative work when you say, I want to put this out at this date. And you work backwards and say, okay, cool. I want to have something tracked and mixed and mastered in order to satisfy that. I'm not the first person to say this, but it's definitely true that creative people can create sometimes more interesting things within guidelines and boundaries. And setting a deadline is just another form of that kind of a, semi-artificial guideline.
Yeah, definitely. And also for the artists who are used to having a smorgasbord of virtual instruments that maybe have never had a band experience, they probably struggle with just not only the overwhelm of all the choices that they have, but just making sure that they account for the really crucial parts of a band. And if you don't have band experience and understand how these pieces have to stack on each other, then it is easy to not only have a cacophony of sound, but also be missing important elements. And unfortunately, bass is probably one of the ones that gets missed the most because we just don't recognize how important that singular low-end instrument can be. But limitations are almost like, how can I make this thing more beautiful if I only have 8 colors to play with instead of a 64 color box of crayons?
Yeah. Or, another strategy that I've used is sometimes intentionally try to do things that you're uncomfortable with or that feel unnatural in order to free up some new voice or element. In the painting space, as an example, like sometimes, I'm right-handed, but sometimes I would choose to pick up the brush with my left hand and make marks that way because they're marks I hadn't made before, right? When you're right hand, you're used to picking up paint in a certain way and pressing it against the canvas in a certain way, but you don't have those same feelings with your opposite hand, your non-dominant hand. And so you get different things that then you have to react to in a way that you're not used to reacting. And I think you can do that musically and creatively, or, people like Kurt Vonnegut or David Bowie or whoever would have these exercises for chopping up lyrics and pulling them out of a hat or things like that, right? Like there's long histories in different creative pursuits of these sorts of things of, can you tune your guitar intentionally wrong, or try an open tuning where you don't usually use open tunings, or pick a sound that you never would ever think you would use and force yourself to come up with a part to start a song with that, right? Like these can be ways to open up new things and push yourself into a new space that you wouldn't uncover if you were just sticking with the same formulaic things that you always pick up.
That's such a great idea. And the key word for me there that you said was react. And I don't think I've really thought about my music in that way. And so I really want to be intentional about thinking about that when I'm doing something, especially in a different genre than what I might ordinarily do. And I love that idea of letting it sort of take a little bit of control so I can sit back and say, hey, what do I do next? And I think that would be an excellent exercise for any artist who wants to sort of branch out and just wants to put more tools in their tool belt.
Yeah, it's a really valuable approach for me, and I think can resonate for other folks as well. And I know I'm doing this a lot, but I equate it again with visual arts, where if you're staring at a blank canvas and you're nervous about it, the quickest way to get over that is to just make a mark, any mark. And then it's no longer a blank canvas, it's now a thing. And now it has a voice and it has a presence, and whatever you do next is because of that first mark in reaction to it. And the same thing with music or writing or cooking or poetry or whatever, right?
Oh, that's awesome. That's beautiful. I really, yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that for the rest of the day. I think that's really, really great. So how can people support you and get your music in a way that it actually is beneficial to you as an artist, and find you and follow you on all the interwebs?
Sure. Yeah, the best ways to support what I'm doing, if you're interested and curious, Bandcamp is the number one best place to support really any musical endeavors, especially on things like Camp Fridays, where Bandcamp, the platform, waives their fees, and so any purchases of music made through the platform goes 100% to the artist on those days. Bandcamp is a place for digital downloads and purchases, and so if you support or want to support the music, that's the best place to do it. If you like streaming and just listening to things through a platform that you are already using, Tidal is probably the best platform there. They have some of the best streaming payers of any of those providers, and it just supports independent musicians a little bit better than some of the other options. On the social channels, I mostly post to Instagram, which then cross-posts a lot of times to Facebook, and both of those just use my full name, which is what I use for all of my music, which is Joshua David Thayer. So you can find me on Instagram, Joshua David Thayer, and on Facebook, Joshua David Thayer. I do have a website, although, like many folks, I'm probably a little lax in keeping that up to date and on sort of current and fresh templates and whatnot. Even though most of my career has been spent in building and maintaining websites, I'm terrible with my own. And then the last thing that's also interesting, I think, is YouTube, where I do make some DIY music videos for some of the material I put out and post things up on YouTube as well.
This has been tremendous, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Becky. It's been great to chat. It's been really interesting.
One of the things that stayed with me most from this conversation with Josh is how often he talked about listening. Not just listening to music, but listening to what the work itself is actually asking for, and then reacting to it. Whether it was his description of letting songs reveal themselves over time, or his willingness to finish something even when it felt uncomfortable, or the way grief opened a door he never expected to walk through. Josh reminded us that clarity doesn't come before action. It comes through it. From a StoryBrand perspective, this could be you moving from your role of self-hero to becoming a guide and to following the music that has been put in front of you so that you can make a difference in the world. Josh didn't suddenly decide to become a frontman. He didn't wait until he had confidence or permission or a perfect plan. He simply answered the call to create and let the identity catch up later. Here's your actionable takeaway. If you're feeling stuck creatively, don't ask, is this good enough? Ask instead, what is the next honest step I can take to finish this? Finish the song. Release the project. Set a deadline, even an artificial one, and let your constraint serve you instead of scare you. When you clarify the next step, momentum follows, and momentum is often what restores our belief in ourselves and what we feel like we have been made to do. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to subscribe to Second Verse and leave a review. It's one of the simplest ways you can help this show and these stories reach more artists who need them. And now, to close out this episode, here's Joshua David Thayer with his song, We Won't Relent.